The Bad Crypto Podcast is brought to you by our friends at eToro. Check out the new Copy Trader feature that allows you to follow successful traders and do what they do with no effort. If you're a U.S. citizen, you can get $25 in free Bitcoin from Travis and myself. Go to badco.in/eToro for details. That's badco.in/eToro. You've heard of Dracula, who comes in the night to suck the blood of innocents so that he might live. You've heard of the Phantom of the Opera, who will stop at nothing to keep captive his beloved Christine. And you've heard of the Mummy, who's been wrapped up so long he's just in a bad mood. And he's often mistaken for Billy Zane. The list of monsters and evildoers goes on. And while these fiends are fictional, there's one that's more insidious than all of these and is very real. It's the creature from Jekyll Island, a beast so terrifying and horrible that it affects you, me, and the American economy every day. As named by author and speaker G. Edward Griffin, the Federal Reserve Bank is the monster that was born off the coast of Georgia and today remains a mystery to most Americans. Well, we are super pleased today to bring a legendary interview with G. Edward Griffin, where we discuss the origins of the Fed, how the money supply works, and how cryptocurrency can play an essential role in bringing about economic freedom for all. One of the most important shows we've ever done. You won't want to miss a beat of episode number 351 of this legend, wait for it, dairy episode number 351, wait for it, of the Bad Crypto Podcast.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, ignition.
Who's bad?
Greetings, friends. This is an incredible episode of the Bad Crypto Podcast we have for you, and along for the ride are myself, Mr. Joel Comm, and my compatriot, comrade, brother-in-arms, Mr. Travis Wright.
Welcome, everyone. Now, this is, I would say this right here, we've had conversations since we've done this interview. I think this might be the best interview that we've done, maybe the most important interview that we've done out of all of the episodes that we've done.
Yeah, this stuff here is really tight, gang. So we're not going to keep you waiting here very long. We want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor because they make this show possible, and they could make trading your cryptos easy, possible, transparent with low fees. I'm talking, of course, about eToro. You can download the eToro app and the eToro wallet for iOS and for Android from the respective stores where you would download such things. And boom, you have access to the top cryptos. And get this, still for a limited time, you can open up a new account with eToro, deposit, fund the account with $50 or more in whatever your currency is. And if you are in the United States of America, and you open a position in any of the cryptos that eToro makes available of $50 or more, we here at the Bad Crypto Podcast, well, we want to send you $25 in Bitcoin. That is an instant 50% increase. You invest $50 and now you've got 75. You just got to go through the process we've got on the website. It's at badco.in/eToro. Again, build your perfect portfolio with just a few taps of your smartphone or clicks on your computer. Badco.in/eToro.
And now you have 70, and now it's 65, and now it's 48, and now it's gone.
Unless, of course, the bull run happens, in which case, yeah, think about it this way, Travis. Okay, so, as of this recording right now, Bitcoin's around 7,000 or so. So let's say you invest $50. If Bitcoin hits the all-time high again, that $50 becomes about $150 and the 25 on top of it. So now your $50 investment with the $25 bonus from us becomes $225.
Are you a financial advisor?
I'm not, but a lot of people out there.
You're just doing some math right there.
I'm just doing math. Mm-hmm.
That's good. All right. Well, I'll tell you what, speaking of math and speaking of crypto and speaking of fiat currency, let's get to this interview right here. This right here is going to be one. It's a little bit longer than usual, but I would say that if you hold it plus this, it'll be worth 3.5 times the value of the time you listen to it by the time you listen to it. This is G. Edward Griffin.
And we are privileged now to go down the rabbit hole with a man who has been bringing others down the rabbit hole of the mystery of the financial systems of the world for many decades now. His name is G. Edward Griffin, but his friends call him Ed. And he's been doing this stuff for quite a while. He was a writer for Curtis LeMay. He was a vice presidential running mate for George Wallace back in 1968. And then he started writing and making documentary-style videos about topics such as the ones that have been covered in his best-selling book, The Creature from Jekyll Island. Travis has referred to this book many times, and it is reveals the mystery of the so-called Federal Reserve. He's here with us now to spin yarns and tell tall tales of the world financial elite. Mr. G. Edward Griffin, welcome to Bad Crypto.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Going to spin some tall tales. All right. I like the sound of that.
You've actually covered a lot of topics over the years. Your bio says you've written about the truth about cancer and the industry, surrounding that, the historical authenticity of Noah's Ark, the Supreme Court of the U.S., terrorism, foreign policy, and the Federal Reserve. You've dove down a lot of rabbit holes in your career.
I certainly have. I'm surprised I ever climbed out again.
Yeah, because there's some people, when you start telling their secrets, they don't like that. They don't want for you to bring out into the light that which they intend to keep in the dark.
That is so true. Yes. Well, I've got a few people on the list like that. I mean, I've taken on the international banking cartel. I've taken on the international pharmaceutical cartel. How's that for 2 starts?
That's cojones of steel as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, when he walks, it clanks, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, it's completely fascinating to me. So folks do not know the story of, the creature from Jekyll Island. It's like about a 600-page book. It goes in, it talks about, this meeting that had happened back in 1910 of these very influential people and how they decided they were going to create a new central banking system, put it in place, implement the IRS system, and here we are over 100 years later. Now, what led you down that rabbit hole to explore that? So as I find that completely fascinating, how did you say, you know what, I want to understand how this whole system works?
Well, that's a very long and rather quite boring story, but I'll try and make it short and boring. How's that?
Maybe throw in a few, kung fu moves.
There you go.
Put some action in.
Yeah. Well, actually, what I said is true. It is a boring story because it's all about my journey. And my journey is a lot like everyone's. I had no idea where I was going to end up. I started in one direction and ended up someplace entirely different. So that's the story of mankind, I guess. But that certainly was how I got to where I am today. We go way back to the middle of the 1960s, I guess, or late 60s, early 70s. And I had decided at this point to go into business on my own. And I opened up a little one-tank film production company because that's what I knew how to do. I studied, film production and communications in school. So I thought that's what I'm going to do. Skip over a lot of holes that I stumbled into along the way. But finally it came to the point where I had decided to do a very low-budget film on the topic of inflation. I thought that was interesting. I knew that I didn't know much about inflation, except that the common knowledge must be wrong. The common knowledge about inflation, that it was somebody else's fault. I mean, the farmers would say, well, the reason prices are so high is because we sell our products to the distributors and the markets, and they have a huge markup on it. And so they're the ones that are causing inflation. And of course, the markets and distributors would say, no, the farmers are making too much money on it. And then somebody would point to the unions. Say, well, the unions are charging too much money to drive the trucks. That's their fault. And the unions would say, no, it's the capitalists. And of course, the Marxists got into this. It was always somebody else's fault for raising prices and gouging the market. And I thought, this doesn't make sense. And I was going to do a research on it. Well, it doesn't take long if you are serious about that. And I went and checked out a lot of books at the library, and I read them. And it didn't take long before I realized that the engine of inflation was something called the Federal Reserve System. I'd never heard of it before. Well, I had. I probably read about it in school and then conveniently forgot about it because it didn't mean anything to me. I always thought the Federal Reserve was a government agency, and that was the impression I got in school, and that they were the good guys. They were there to stabilize the economy and preserve the purchasing power of the dollar and all those good things. So I didn't pay much attention to it except to be thankful in my nightly prayers that we had it, that kind of a thing. But I found out that, wait a minute, something was different. And the books and the people, the whistleblowers and all of that were saying, that's not the way it is, folks. They were saying that the Federal Reserve was a banking cartel. A cartel? What do you mean a cartel? What is that? I wasn't even sure what that word meant. Had to go back and say, a cartel. That's a group of privately owned companies, not a government agency. A group of private companies all in the same field who decide to quit competing with each other so that they can come to agreements on and set prices and profit margins and policies, and they can gouge the public, and the public has no place else to go because it's like a shared monopoly in the market. They just can't. Well, anyway, I got to that stage, and then I never produced the film. Something else came up, something that was a little easier to research than that. I realized this was a huge can of worms. So something else came up, and the books were, all the stuff, my papers and books were put away in a big box in the back of the closet someplace. And some years later, some little old ladies in Pasadena, we've heard about them. They were real. Some little old ladies in Pasadena called me. They heard I was giving speeches on this, that, and the other thing. And they asked me if I would like to address their little study group that they had in Pasadena, of course. And their study group was about taxes. And they said, would you like to talk about taxes? And I said, well, I don't know much about taxes except that they're too high and I'm against them. What else can I say? And I said, but I do know something about a hidden tax. And of course, the light bulb went off. And they said, what do you mean a hidden tax? I said, well, I could come and talk to you about a hidden tax. It's much bigger than any tax that you've been talking about. Of course, I was talking about inflation, but they didn't know that. And, so that was my call. So I went and I got my box out and I thumbed through all these books. This was some years later, by the way. This was much later.
We'd say late 80s, mid 80s sometime?
Well, let me think.
Because the book came out in 1994, correct?
Yeah, this would be the mid 80s, yes.
Okay.
So, and I went and I reread some of this stuff. And by this time I had learned a lot along the road. And some of the things that I didn't understand the first time through snapped into focus. I thought, oh my gosh, this is a profoundly deep rabbit hole, as you call it. I didn't catch this the first time through. And I realized that it was an extremely important topic because it affected all aspects of our lives. And so I spent a little time thumbing through, making notes, and I prepared a speech for these ladies. And it was a small group, probably about 40 people in their living room. But it was my chance to review and to put something together with an opening, a middle, and an ending. And in that process, I became aware that there was a story here. So I gave my speech. And the nice ladies came up to me afterwards, and they were very complimentary. They said, "Oh, this is wonderful. You want to go on the road with this presentation?" Well, you never say that to a young guy that wants to go on the road with a presentation, because that's what I did. I thought, oh, well, they liked it. And so I started to produce a series of one-day seminars. I called it the Crash Course on Money. And they were, I would say, wildly successful. A lot of people came out to hear my seminars, and I traveled all around the United States for about a year, maybe a year and a half. And I was packing them in, and I thought I was doing a good job. But I became very dissatisfied or rather nervous, because at the end of most of my presentations, there would be somebody that would come up and say, "Well, Mr. Griffin, this is all very startling, and I believe that what you're saying is true, and now I understand, blah, blah. But what do you recommend I do to protect myself? My husband died, left a small estate, and I don't want to squander it. What would you recommend I do? Should I buy an apartment house? Should I get gold or silver? Should I go into cash? Or what should I do?" And I had to face myself in the mirror. I hadn't the foggiest idea of what to say to these people. I was a fraud. Yes, I knew about the Federal Reserve, but the real world of investments, I knew nothing about that, and people wanted that information. So I canceled the series, the speeches, and I decided to go back to school. I really did. I surprised myself. I wanted to learn about the real markets, and so I enrolled in something called the College for Financial Planning. It's a correspondence course, but it's a very highly esteemed course. They issue certificates like a CPA. This was a CFP, Certified Financial Planner, and it was a long.
And so you're in your 50s at this point. So you're like mid 50s or so, yeah. And you're like, I'm going to go back to school. See, that's great.
That's like Rodney Dangerfield did, right?
but he don't get no respect. Yeah. So anyway, I decided that I'd go back to school, and I got my CFP designation, and I really learned a lot. It's not that I wanted to be a financial planner. I just wanted to learn about the real markets. So then I realized that the story I was sitting on was one of the biggest stories that you could possibly imagine. I decided then to write a book. That was the beginning of it. So it was about a 7-year journey from that point for me to gather all this stuff that I knew, but I didn't know all about it. I didn't know enough about it to offer myself as some kind of a half-baked expert. You know, to write a book, you stick yourself out. And I thought, when I published the book, boy, am I going to get splattered. I dreaded the day that some college professor would read my book and expose me as the imbecile that I was, you know, because this was not my field. And well, it never happened. That's another story. I'll come back to that in a minute. So anyway, I published the book, and that's how it happened. It was just a journey of one step leading to the other. And if I had known how long the journey was and how many challenges there were and how many mysterious things and how many doors opened up into other rooms that had doors that opened up into still other rooms. It's a huge topic. Money flows everywhere. And it's at the heart of just about everything it's important in our lives. If
I don't think that's boring at all. I think that's great. And I want a little G. Edward Griffin action figure now who's like taking on the world financial system.
Oh, don't forget to get the bobblehead going on.
Right, absolutely. So let's talk about the actual content then of The Creature from Jekyll Island. Obviously, it is a long book. You have many words in it. But if you were to sum up, if you have just a few minutes with somebody who thinks, like the majority of Americans, that the Federal Reserve is a government agency, how would you, in just a few minutes, persuade them that their world view is upside down?
Well, I would ask him to call the Federal Reserve and ask.
Boom. He did it in less than one in a sentence, Travis.
Because they'll explain it. I mean, they've written on it, their books, pamphlets. It's very clear. It's not a mystery. They don't hide that fact. It's just that they don't encourage people to understand it.
Why is that?
Well, because thinking that the Federal Reserve is a government agency creates the false comfort that, well, it's in good hands. I mean, we elect our elected representatives. We have the president. He appoints the chairman of the board, all these things. Therefore, we, the people of America, have control over it. And certainly it must be in our interest because we own it. We control it.
I mean, here it is. I've got a dollar bill here in my hands, and on the top of it, it says Federal Reserve Note, the United States of America. Does that not give every indication that this is an official currency for our government?
Well, it is an official currency for our government, but the government doesn't create it nor control it. If you understand what happened back in the beginning, if you have the courage to read the Federal Reserve Act, you talk about boring, but it's all in there. And what they did is the United States Congress passed a law, which in essence was a cartel agreement. That's another story, how that cartel agreement or the Federal Reserve Act came into being. Let me digress for just a moment. The reason I called my book The Creature from Jekyll Island is because the Federal Reserve System was created on Jekyll Island, which is a real island off the coast of Georgia. And it was done, the plan was put together in 1910, and it was passed into law in 1913. And what they did is they created on that island the outline of a cartel agreement for all the major banks in the United States to come together and share the market and control the market to their advantage. But they the reason they were on Jekyll Island is because they wanted to do this in secret. If the word had leaked out that the Federal Reserve Act, which was what advertised to the voters and to Congress too in some ways, it was advertised as a means of controlling the banks. Because back in 1910, there was a lot of concern about the banks, the big bad banks. They call it the banking cartel. They didn't call it cartel in those days, but they were concerned about the banks, and they wanted legislation. They wanted their government to control those banks. And so the banks said, "Hey guys, are we going to sit around and wait for some jerk in Congress to come up with a law that's going to control our business? No, that'd be stupid. Let us do it. We'll draft the law to control the banks. But we don't want anyone to know that we wrote it, because then the cat would be out of the bag." So they went to Jekyll Island in the privacy of this Jekyll Island club, which was owned by all the big billionaires on Wall Street.
And they all snuck there too, where they were all like undercover and like taking trains on different names, and they were all converging into this place under complete anonymity. Yeah.
Yeah, that was what caught my attention. One of the things caught my attention in the beginning. I realized that journey to Jekyll Island was done under conditions of great secrecy. In fact, in my view, I don't think many wars of history were plotted under conditions of greater secrecy than that. Yet they just knew it must not be discovered that they were writing the Federal Reserve Act, because then they would see what it was. They would see that it was a fraud. So we get back to the question of, how do you explain this to somebody? They have to know a little bit of history, but it's easy to summarize it. Somebody asked me, what is the Federal Reserve System? And you've got, 30 seconds to explain it. I can say, well, I don't need 30 seconds. I can do it in 4. And they look at me rather surprised. And I say, okay, here it is. The Federal Reserve System is a scam. Any questions? And that's it. But now
2 seconds. Well done. You just shaved your time.
Yeah, and you could even shave it further by leaving the word Federal Reserve off and just say it's a scam. Now you got 3 words. But of course that leaves a lot to be explained as to, well, what scam and how does it work and how do you know? Things like that. Well, then you wind up with a 600-page book to fill in the blank spots. But that's really it. It's as simple as that. And one of the problems that I and many people have had in understanding the Federal Reserve is because we're Boy Scouts, We believe that everybody is honest and upfront, and we couldn't imagine that anything like the Federal Reserve System, which has this big building in Washington, D.C., and is so revered and is taught in our schools as the great defender of the economy for the American people. We couldn't believe that could be anything close to a scam. How would that ever happen? Impossible. So we weren't able to see it. But finally, when you get the history and you read the papers of the people who did this, you realize that, by golly, they did create a scam, and they knew it, and they talked about it. They wrote papers on it. They gave speeches on it. They described it. They plotted it. It's in the record. And then you think, oh my gosh, where have I been all of my life? That's kind of that's the pattern or the path that most people take on this topic. Like I did. I started in totally as an unbeliever. No, it couldn't be a scam. Not at all. It was just complicated, and I was too stupid to understand it. That's how I thought it was. And then I realized when I started reading the words of these people that created it themselves, about issues about how do we keep this from being known? How do we do this so it appears to be something which it isn't? And they talked about that, and I thought, I better go open my eyes and take a second look at this. So anyway, I'm off the track. How would I explain it to the average person? I would just say it's a means by which the banking cartel, or the banking industry, formed a cartel so they could dominate the market of money and banking, and they could write their own rules and regulations. They would give it to Congress. Congress would pass it as a law. And so since it's a law, now people think it's a government agency, but it's not a government agency. It was just made legal by a law. And so now Congress went one step further. Not only did they allow the banks to regulate their own industry, but to their amazement, Woodrow Wilson and the whole Congress gave the Federal Reserve System the power to create the nation's money supply. Those are 2 separate issues. How do you regulate your own industry? But the other one was to take your constitutional right to issue money and transfer it to a private group of people. And they did that, and nobody questioned it. Today, nobody questions it. How can Congress delegate its constitutional authority to issue and control the quality and the quantity of money? But they did. And nobody, even to this day, most people don't know it. And if you ask most college professors on banking and money, they say, huh, what are you talking about? But that is exactly what happened.
Yeah. I want to talk about the education system in a little bit, but I want to follow that up because that's what really woke me up to the world. I learned about this in the year 2000. And then once wait a second, no, the money is all backed by gold. What do you mean? They can create paper money out of thin air and this fractional reserve banking thing, which was such a crazy thing for me to wrap my brain around. I was like, if I deposit $1 million in my bank, now the bank can loan out $10 million, money that doesn't even exist, and then request interest back on this money that never even existed before they created it out of thin air. Like the whole system to me. And then I started realizing, wait a second, there are so many things that we think we know that are not the way they are. And it's just such like this right here was the gateway drug, really, for me to understand really more so of how the world works. And I think that it's very important. I think a lot of people that are in the cryptocurrency space are libertarians, and they've done research. They understand. Most people have never even heard the term fiat currency. That's not a term that is in the common vernacular of most world citizens, right? Like paper money out of thin air. It's just unbelievable. I want to ask you about because I want our audience to understand that even today, who owns the Federal Reserve Bank? There's these families. There's X amount of these. That's a trust, right? And then the IRS, it gets paid taxes, and that goes back to the trust of the Federal Reserve. How does that work? Because I don't even know that I have a full grasp on it, but I think it's very important for people to understand where the profits are going. And then I have a point after that. After you explain this, I have a point.
Well, you do have a good point, but the question of who owns the Federal Reserve is a tricky one, because there are different definitions of the word ownership. And so you have to choose one. Most people think that if you hold, first of all, back off. The Federal Reserve is a corporation. Okay, that's what it is. It's legally a corporation, and it was...
Which is why there's a chairman, right?
The chairman, yes. Yeah. And unlike most corporations, which are created by states, this one was created by Congress. So the federal government created this corporation. So it's a federally created corporation, but still is a corporation. And with most corporations, you would assume that the people who own the stock certificates own the corporation. Why? Because they can vote. The owners of the stock can vote the chairman out. They can vote the boards of directors and so forth. And in that way, they can change their leadership if they wish. And also, the people who own the stock really own it. The test of ownership is what you can do with it. If you own something, you can sell it or you can give it away. And you start looking at it, and when you read the Federal Reserve Act, you realize that the primary functions of ownership are denied to the stockholders. Stockholders cannot sell their stock. Stockholders are the banks. So you could start to say, well, the banks own it because they own the stock. Now, the original issue of the Federal Reserve did have some people, private people, who owned stock in the formation stage. And you can find that in the pages of the New York Times back in 1910. They listed some of these people that actually held stock. There have been changes since then. And now, as far as we can tell on the outside looking in, all the stock is owned by the member banks. Okay, but the member banks cannot sell their stock. They can't give it away. And they don't even have voting power. They cannot vote for the chairman of the Federal Reserve System and so forth. So it's kind of a facade in the sense of ownership. The true test of ownership always is not who holds a piece of paper, but who controls the item. I mean, you can own a piece of paper that says that car is yours. But if somebody says you can't drive the car because for whatever reason, you didn't pay a license fee, let's say, then you don't own the car if somebody else can tell you that you can't use it. So the test of ownership is control. A bureaucrat in Washington or a state can have a limousine assigned to him or her, And just, he picks up the phone, and the limousine shows up. He has a driver. He doesn't own that car, but he totally controls it. That is ownership in my sense, and in most people's sense. They say, oh, whoever controls a piece of property owns it. Now, with that understanding, the owners, the true owners of the Federal Reserve System, are the ones who control it, and that would be the largest banks in the United States. Those are the owners, and they control it. They select the list of names that are submitted to the president, from which he must choose a chairman. The president of the United States technically chooses the chairman of the Federal Reserve, but where does he get the list? Nobody ever asks that. It's a fact that the presidents who make these appointments don't even know these people that they appoint. You're not going to find their names in their private address books. They've never met these people in most cases. So they're following the advice and directions of who? Who tells the president what names to choose from? Maybe not which name to choose, but which ones to choose from, a list. And that list always, of course, is made up of people who are very friendly to the banking cartel, either members of it or very close to it. There's never anybody on these lists who would be hostile to the policies of the banks, never. So the president chooses from a list that's provided to him by his biggest donors. The biggest donors are the banks and the corporations which they control. So the president does not choose the chairman of the Federal Reserve in a real sense. What actually happens is that the Federal Reserve chooses the president because they're the ones that provide the money that make it possible for a candidate to win elections. They control the media, and they control, a lot of things that will determine how the American people vote. It's a convoluted thing, and it's not an easy answer, an easy question to answer, because most people keep thinking of who owns the stock certificates. And there's always this hidden question of, well, do the Rothschild hold some hidden stock over in Europe, and do other banks in Europe? And that wouldn't surprise me. But if they do, it's not significant, because the controllers of the Federal Reserve are the true owners, and those are the biggest banks in the United States. Now, who owns those banks? There's another question. In most of these big banks, you can't find out who owns them. They, too, if they have stocks, often are held in street names. We don't know who the true holders of those.
But aren't they like descendants, and there's like a trust of descendants of those who were at Jekyll Island who helped create this? Like, J.P. Morgan and his bank, Chase, and the Rockefeller banks that they've owned and controlled, and Jacob Schiff and the banks that, all those people that were there creating it. How are their families still benefiting from that today? Because they own the banks? Because they're the ones that own the banks now, or what?
Well, they're the ones that control the banks, and therefore they do own the banks. Yeah, of course. If you can determine,
there you go.
Who is going to be appointed or elected as the president of a bank, or if you are buddies with all of the people on the board of directors, and you have this interlock, and you find the same board of directors the same people on the board of directors of different banks, and also the biggest, largest corporations and the media companies. If you look at an interlocking chart, I've seen a few of them. It's a maze. It looks like a spider web. But if you really get down and look at the lines, you'll see that these lines connect certain very important people to many different major corporations in the United States. So it's an interlock.
That's such a key point there. I've seen that. There's like the committee of 300 or whatever. There are these people that are on the board of all of these corporations, and they're the ones that really control the corporations, control the banks, control the media. It's that mechanism. I want to ask this about the debt, because there's this mechanism here that ties all that together. So here's the Fed, but then also that was created was the IRS at the same time. And so now, for some odd reason, America's $21 trillion plus in debt. We can print $100 bills for 6 cents, right? So if you do the math, there's no way that we should be broke if you can create a $100 bill for 6 cents. But the way that debt happens is the debt, and then we pay then the people pay the IRS, and then the IRS pays the Federal Reserve Bank back for the debts or whatever, and then that money goes back to the people who control the banks. That's kind of how I understand it.
Well, I certainly have run across that theory, and I'm not challenging it. I just have never gotten that deep into it on the tax side. as I see it, the tax system in America is not so much for revenue. In fact, the bankers themselves have written papers on this. There was a guy whose name I can't remember now, but he's in my book. Maybe I'll think of it. But he was one of the, not only a member of the board of one of the regional banks of the Federal Reserve System, but his name was Hummel or something like that. But he actually was the person who created the federal withholding tax. He was also had a position in the government. And he wrote a paper, which I came across, and I quoted him in my book. And he said something like this. He said, now that we have the Federal Reserve System, and he didn't go on to explain what that meant, but we understand that now that we have a means of creating money ourselves, creating money, the purpose of taxes become very narrow. We don't even need the tax, is basically what he says. We can fund everything we want to do simply by creating the money through the Federal Reserve System. But then he said we still need the tax primarily as a social mechanism, as a means of engineering society to move money from one group to another, to reward our friends and punish our enemies, to redistribute wealth, to encourage one sector of the economy over the other. In other words, as a means of control. That's what they have the taxes for. So when I hear people concerned about where are the taxes going, well, that's important to know. I admit that. But the point is that all of the taxes are meant as a mechanism of control. What more do we need to know? And yes, that was designed by the same people who created the Federal Reserve System.
That is insidious. I mean, just to hear you say that it's chilling. And, okay, so you're more seasoned than we. You've been around for a bit, and you've seen the effects of inflation, more than we have. We all see the charts of what the dollar could buy 50 years ago versus what it could buy now. And I'm wondering, when you think back to being a wee lad, you would go to buy a meal, just maybe a few items. Like, what do you remember spending to get typical things that we buy today?
That's funny because I often think about that. As a kid, across from the grade school the first grade school where I went, there was a little candy store. It was actually in the basement or half basement, just across the street from the school. And you go down about 10 stairs, and the windows were above ground, but most of the shop was below ground. And it was a candy store. And the greatest joy for most of us was to stop in the candy store and for a penny come out with a big long strip of paper with little gummy drops glued to it. A penny, you get a lot of candy, and for 2 or 3 cents, you could get a candy bar. 2 cents, a great candy bar, like a Mars bar or something like that. And I've often thought about that. There's a song that came out some years ago. It was something like, penny, candy, candy for a penny. It takes much more than a penny now.
So much more.
So much more.
So let's then on that line of thinking, that candy bar today, $1, $1.50, whatever. Tie that into the printing of money and how that happens, because we just accept, things get more expensive over time, but there is a financial mechanism that causes that to take place.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's it. That's what they call inflation, which I think is probably not a good descriptive, because it's true that the money supply inflates. And so they think, well, the prices are going up. But in reality, the prices don't go up. It's just that the value of the penny goes down, or the value of the dollar goes down. And why the value of a unit of the currency goes down is because of its quantity in relationship to the quantity of goods and services out there that are bidding for it. And you can just imagine, if you're playing a game of Monopoly, everybody gets a certain amount of money at the beginning of the game. And so the prices are pretty well established by, there's the limited of the real estate on the board, and there's the limit of the money. And so you put one against the other, that all of the real estate on the board has to equal approximately the value of all the money that's available for it. Well, if somebody were to discover a second box of Monopoly in the closet, and they, oh, look, I found another box of Monopoly, and look at all this money that's in it. And they get the money out and redistribute it among everybody. Well, what happens to the prices on Boardwalk and Marvin's Gardens? Well, it just doubles. Because
there's a word for that, right? I think it's called cheating.
Yeah, well, yeah, of course it's cheating. It's fraudulent. It's a scam. Let's go back to that word. So it's a simple thing to understand. I think most grade kids can understand it, but unfortunately, by the time some of them get to be college professors, they can't figure it out because they got to figure out that, well, it's a means of stabilizing the economy and it's a good thing, blah, blah, blah. And they don't really understand that inflation is just simply a relationship between the quantity of money and the quantity of goods and services. So as long as the quantity of money is expanding at approximately the same rate as the goods and services in a society, then the purchasing power of the money remains stable. But if the money starts to expand at a rate faster than goods and services, then all of a sudden there's more bidding power against it and prices are bid up. And prices go up because the value of that purchase of the unit of the money goes down. And throughout history, the only thing that has ever been discovered through trial and error that stabilizes the purchasing power of money is a monetary system that's based on something that requires human effort to produce. Because human effort is the common denominator between goods and services and on the one side and money on the other. If you don't have human effort on both sides of the equation, now you don't have a real equation. It's not a mathematical equation. It's a social equation. So as long as money was based on something that took human effort to produce, the purchasing power of that money remained stable over long periods of time. Well, gold and silver, of course, is always the one or the other that societies have voluntarily chosen. Without government intervention or coercion, given freedom of choice, they may try something and try something else, but that didn't work as well as gold and silver. So historically, every instance is that after time, societies that have tried different things for money reverted back to using gold or silver because it takes a lot of human effort to produce gold and silver in a form that it can be exchanged. That's one of the reasons that maybe we'll talk about cryptos in a minute. That's one of the differences between cryptocurrencies and money that requires human effort to produce. So that's an important part of the equation because if you remove the human effort challenge from money, then all you have is just the goodwill or the wisdom, the benevolence of the people making the decisions as to how much money to have. And if there's one thing you can count on, if you give a group of people the power to create money out of nothing, they're going to abuse that power sooner or later, and they're going to run away with the scam that we're talking about. They'll create it because it's to their advantage to do so. And I don't care how good they are when they start off, they're going to be corrupted by it. And if they're not corrupted by it, eventually they will die and be replaced by someone who will be corrupted by it. It's just as sure as shooting. Any monetary system that is like that is going to blow up.
Travis, it reminds me of the ICO phase, right? We saw a lot of people printing money in the form of cryptocurrency out of thin air, some of them legitimately and some of them just for the purpose of saying, hey, we think we can get away with this.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And they did, many of them.
Many of them did. Now, what do you think about the mechanisms within cryptocurrencies? As while we're here, and I just do have a couple of questions about education and your interview with Yuri Bezmenov in a bit. But I want to talk about crypto because we're in a perfect time for that now. Like, so you understand the mechanisms of it and how it's maybe deflationary in nature because there's a limited supply. Like, I guess we'll just start with Bitcoin. You know, what is your thoughts around Bitcoin as a currency? Do you think that there's a chance that Bitcoin could become a world reserve currency down the road?
Well, those are two interesting points. Let's start with the issue of limited supply. I would like to challenge that notion. To me, the amount of cryptos that can be created is infinite. And we've already seen, the forks and new cryptos coming online. Any one cryptocurrency, yes, might be limited by its algorithms. But that's not the world we're moving into. The world we're moving into is one in which all of them will be exchanged, and you can move from one to the other, and you can have many of them. And when you put them all together, there's an infinite supply of money. So the idea that cryptocurrency is limited in quantity, I think, is a myth, because that's not the way it is. It has unlimited ceilings to it, which is an interesting fact in itself. But then we get back to the other thing, which is, do the banks really and the governments really hate or fear cryptocurrencies? And the answer is obviously no, because they're in the forefront now of developing it. They want to control it. The banks in particular have dreamed for centuries of a cashless society. And cryptos are the wet dream of these people. This is exactly what they have dreamed about and wanted for so long, and they can hardly wait to have one that's universal, that they can control. This is the key, that they can control, and they're confident that they can. And I'm not so confident that they cannot. I think that the way things are evolving with technology and with the political scene and all of that, I think that their intention of controlling cryptocurrencies is probably well-founded.
Well, it is definitely an interesting thing, because we don't know who Satoshi Nakamoto is, the person who created it. I've read that in the 90s, there was a document by the NSA about creating cryptography and money and utilizing that together. And so I've always had questions about that. And, the fact that, more and more governments are starting to, the Chinese are creating the blockchain. It's going to be a gold-based yuan, right? So then some of these governments are creating these sovereign currencies as well. We all have a smartphone in our pocket, which makes it easy to use cryptocurrency, right? So, but in a world where if there's no electricity, then crypto sure is very difficult, right? If something happens to our electric grid or whatever. So it's an interesting sort of thought that you're throwing out there about how governments are really excited about it.
Well, they are, and they see it as the means of ultimate control, because if everything we buy now has to be done through a cryptocurrency or an exchange of cryptocurrencies, and there is a central funnel through which they all go, which is where they're headed. They'll allow side chains to exist. They'll allow individual private chains to exist. But if you want to buy anything outside of your immediate group, you've got to go through an exchange or index. They're building this index right now. I think it's about done. If you go on your tax form and you see if you're in business for yourself, and they say, go to this manual and put in the 6 or 7 digit number that describes your industry or your profession. And the IMF and the World Bank have been working for at least a year, probably longer, to expand that system. So it includes not only your profession, but your specific role within a profession. Do you make right-hand monkey wrenches or left-hand monkey wrenches? And this is a very detailed indexing system, so that every transaction, every type of transaction, every item, every bolt, every thread of every bolt, depending on its length, its material, everything you can conceivably imagine will have a number attached to it and will go through this digital exchange, this digital index. And if you want to use digital currencies in the real world, you will have to go through that. And you'll be happy to do it because it allows you to buy a cup of coffee in Taiwan when you get off the plane, for example. So it'll be wonderful, except that now if you suddenly turn out to be persona non grata with the authorities, they say your social score doesn't look too good. You may not even be able to get on that plane to go to Taiwan.
Like China.
Like China.
China's doing.
And that is where cryptocurrencies are going to play a major role, I'm afraid, in the so-called.
Let me do a quick follow-up on that, because there are people, especially those of a religious persuasion, that believe the end times type of terminology that they read in the Old Testament, where there's going to be this mark of the beast, this mark, whatever it is, that will belong on their forehead or their hand, that without which they will not be able to buy or sell or trade. And certainly for those who want to read into that, you could say, well, you just chip people and, put them on the blockchain. Is that the read that you get of it?
Well, absolutely. I don't like to build my worldview around the end times because it's so it leads to the conclusion that, well, it's all over, folks. There's nothing.
Yeah, so what's the point, right?
What's the point? And I don't believe that for an instant. I think we've been in the end times for thousands of years, and it's just a question of, we all have our end time coming up pretty soon, probably sooner than when the prophecy might be fulfilled. But anyway, I don't like dwelling on that aspect of it because it's self-defeating. And I believe, by the way, this is my personal conviction only. I believe that our enemies are encouraging people to become preoccupied with the end times because that takes them right out of the battle. And if I were on the other side, that's what I would be doing. I would make sure that people are thinking, well, let's just fall on our knees. Let's just get our own spirits, our own lives in order with God and everything, and let it happen. Don't resist it. And boy, I think that would be a huge, huge mistake.
Well, but I guess what really is stands out to me is that if that is indeed the only way for people to buy and sell, and whatever you think of the Bible, here's the story that if you don't have the mark, you won't, and there will be people who won't take it, and now they're outside the system, right? Needing an entirely new economy in order to survive, and maybe that's a good thing.
Well, maybe it is, but my view on that is that I would rather just change the system or prevent that system from happening instead of trying to figure out how to get along with it and how to survive in spite of it. How about facing it down and making a statement that no, this is not what we're going to allow to happen. It's a difference in approach.
I want to talk about that because it seems like a pretty good segue into. In 1984, you had an interview with Yuri Bezmenov, and it was a really interesting one. I think that it's popped up multiple times over the years, and then over the last year or so, you re-edited it with much better footage. So I saw like the old cruddy footage, but now there's much better footage out there. And what was really interesting is they talked about how the Russians in the 1960s started this ideological subversion of America through the educational system and through some other systems where they began to demoralize the U.S., then destabilize the U.S., then there's the crisis phase, and then they go into the normalization phase. And according to that video that you did a year ago, that we're in that crisis phase right now because the communists have infiltrated all of these different industries and all these different areas that impact the minds of the last three generations. Their plan was, let's subvert the minds of the next three generations, and that can lend them over to communism. Where are we now, and how are you seeing this play out from that interview, 30 years ago with this dude?
Well, I think your analysis is right on target. Yeah, according to Yuri's proposal, and he should know, I mean, he was a KGB agent. He was a defector from the Soviet Union. He was in charge of disinformation for the American press or any press that came to Russia. His job was, as I'm just doing this not for your benefit, but for viewers, his job was to take the newspaper reporters and journalists around, get them drunk, show them the good things that they had created in Moscow as a show place, and make them believe that that's the way it was all around Russia. It was a kind of a show. It was, to give you an example, they staged a wedding in a Christian church, so that the newspaper reporters could say, "Oh my gosh, we were told that Russia didn't allow weddings anymore in churches, but look, here's one, and they're there, they're getting married, and there's a group there, they're drinking champagne, and they're dancing, and their music, and they were invited to join the crowd." And they go back and they write about that, and of course, Yuri says, "That was our stage show. Is that guy and that girl got married about 3 times a week. In fact, they were complaining because they wanted some time off. They didn't want to get married today.
We're tired of getting married every day." What the hell?
We laugh
I want
at
a divorce finally. I get the hell out of this.
Yeah, we laugh at it now, but this is the way the world works even today. A lot of what we see in the news and so forth, you talk about fake news. That's about it. So anyway, that was Yuri's story. He should know, and he said, yes, you go through these stages that you mentioned, and the second to the last one was crisis. And of course, then the crisis justifies bringing in harsh controls to put down the crisis. In other words, we would call it martial law. And everybody is so, oh, thank God we've got martial law to get rid of all this violence in the streets and to get rid of all of these crazies out there. Thank you for martial law. And then that's the end of it, because the martial law never leaves. It just becomes normalized. And they call that normalization, to get rid of the chaos and make people grateful for it. Now that's, of course, you stand back and look at what's happening, not just in America, but around the world. Look at Europe as well. This is the strategy that's been going on for decades, to create chaos, to create violence in the streets, to divide people against each other, hatred, animosity, conflict. And then everybody is saying, oh my gosh, here in the United States, is this going to break out into race war? That's what they want. They want race war. They have these actors of all colors, by the way, white and black and brown. They're actors. They're on the payroll. People like George Soros. They're actors. They go in front of the cameras and they break windows and they shout obscenities. And even in Congress, we've got actors who are trying to create chaos by demanding the impeachment of the president. It's all acting, and it's all to divide people against each other and to hate each other, so that when the violence finally erupts on the streets, that's their goal. They can bring in martial law and say, we are going to restore you. We are going to introduce,
protect you, right?
We're going to normalize it. That's going to use the same word. I guarantee you, the same word. We're going to bring back normalcy. And
so that becomes a totalitarian sort of this authoritarian dystopia thing, with technology powering it.
With the technology powering it, and also making it more efficient and making it more difficult to escape. Yes.
Wow.
You are a veritable wealth of information, and I want to respect your time, because you've been gracious already to give us an hour, but I wonder if we can close with a quick speed round, because you have written about so many topics. Rather than go in depth, maybe just 15 to 30 seconds on just a summary. When I spit this out at you, you've covered the topic of cancer. What is the conclusion? What do we need to know?
I love this. It'll take me a little bit longer this time around than just saying it's a scam. But okay, cancer. How do I reduce this to its essence? My conclusion, after doing quite a bit of research on it and leading up to the publication of my book called World Without Cancer, The Story of Vitamin B17, is that cancer is a natural process in the body that's gone out of control. It's not a disease. It's not caused by bacteria or a virus or something like that. It's the healing process, in essence. It's the healing process whereby when cells are damaged, the body kicks in and starts to create new cells to replace it. And when the new cells have replaced it, well, then there's a signal, electrical and chemical signals that go into play and say, okay, you can stop now. And you're fine. You've replaced skin. Every 7 years on average, we replace almost all of our cells in our body through this mechanism. It's a healing and growth mechanism. When that gets out of control or out of rye, something goes wrong with it. Now these cells don't stop healing. They overheal, and we generally call that a cancerous tumor. Something has gone too far. That's an oversimplification of how I conclude the cancer should be viewed, as a violation of a natural process.
I guess my question there, Ed, is more towards the conspiracy angle, is do the powers that be have a cure and it's not being released because...
Well, let me get to that, because first of all, I've got to say that therefore the control for cancer, or the solution to cancer, is not to remove the tumor, because the tumor is really the symptom. Orthodox medicine looks at the tumor like, the cancer, look, let's cut it out. Let's burn it out. Let's poison it out. We get rid of the tumor. Madam, the cancer is gone. And that's not true. That's why we have such a problem. They treat the cancer tumor as the cancer when it's only the symptom. And our job, our alternative doctors that are pursuing this theory, feel that we have to find out what went wrong with the normal body mechanism that allowed the tumor to grow, and treat the patient at that level. And then the tumor will go away, or that it could remove it then possibly, but the condition that caused it is gone. Now, if that's the case, then what are the pharmaceutical companies which dominate the medical profession? What are they doing? Are they looking for a cure? The answer is no. And people from whistleblowers in particular would tell you, no, that's not the goal of the pharmaceutical company, nor would it be yours possibly if you were the president of some large pharmaceutical company. Your job as president of the company is to produce income for the company. Now, if you came up with a cure, now especially a cheap cure, what happens to your company? Your company goes broke and you're fired, man. You're out of there. And so the whistleblowers have come out and they said, look, the modern model of healthcare, and as determined by the pharmaceutical industry, is not to cure anything, but to control it, to maintain it so that you can work and live and just keep alive only if you continue taking that pill every day for the rest of your life in order to maintain your ability to survive the cancer. But if you never cure it, because then you're out of business. So that is, in a nutshell, what we are facing and why cancer is not being cured. That's why the rate of cancer keeps going up year after year, even though the amount of money spent on research is astronomical. Those who
and B17 has something to do with helping keep you healthy?
Yes, it does. B17 is a part of the food chain that primitive peoples and even not primitive peoples normally would get in their food. It's only when you get into really hyper-modern societies where the food supply is so controlled and so processed that some of these substances are eliminated or killed right out of it. And that amygdalin, this B17, is one of those things. It's a substance that's ubiquitous in nature. It's in 1,400 edible plants. But people don't eat them if they have any choice because they're bitter. If you eat an apple seed and taste the taste of an apple seed, it's bitter as all get out. But that's the taste that you're looking for. If you eat an apricot seed and chew it, bitter. Oh, who would eat that stuff? But that's the taste. It's in grasses. You know, animals that have sort of a instinctive feeling for how to keep themselves well. You look at a sick dog or a cat, what do? They start eating grass, don't they? Not just any grass, but the broad leaf grasses, the tunis grass, the arrowgrass, and things like that. They're rich in vitamin B17, but they're bitter. You don't want to make a soup out of grass. It's bitter. And so modern societies that have the abundance to choose their foods, and they get all these sugary foods and processed foods, they don't have that bitter taste, but they also don't have amygdalin. And the degree to which the diet is deficient in amygdalin is a direct proportion to the degree of cancer. And that's just a statistical fact. Now you can take it from there, and run with it.
Let's talk about Bittercoin.
Bad Bitcoin, huh?
I should have known when in speaking to somebody who is so well studied and researched to give me a quick answer that you can't. I mean, there's so much information. I want to ask about one more thing.
Well, excuse me. I suppose if I went back and tried to summarize what I just said, I would say the answer to cancer is found in nature.
Yeah. But that's great. So the one other thing you have written on your books is the historical authenticity of what many believe is a fable. That's Noah's Ark. What were your conclusions?
Okay, that's a little bit out of the political realm, isn't it? But yeah, my conclusion is that Noah's Ark was real. It's in Turkey. It's not on Mount Ararat like they all say. It's, if you go to the Bible and look at the exact translation, it says that Noah's Ark does not say it landed on Mount Ararat. It says it landed in the mountains, plural, of Ararat. Ararat was the kingdom of Urartu. It was a big kingdom. And Mount Ararat, which wasn't named that at the time, was just one of the many mountains in that kingdom. So the Bible doesn't say it was on Mount Ararat, that it was in one of those mountains. And sure enough, the fossil that was found by the people that I was relying on for our research is about, I think it's about 17 miles away from Mount Ararat. Now, up on the mountain, you can find these big lodestones, big, huge, monstrous stones. They're anchor stones. And you know they're anchor stones because they have holes in the top of them where the rope went through. And they're just sort of scattered up the mountain. You could tell as the water came down, these anchor stones, which were dragging behind the ship to keep it always, well, they used drogue stones on the Nile, and they used to anyway, to steer the ships. They were drag stones. They put them off the back of the ship. And as the current took the ship down, if they wanted to steer it, they would move the stone from one side to the other and put the drag on left or right, and that would steer the ship. And they used them also in open seas because when the wind blows, the wind will always blow the ship in a 90 degrees to the wind. And the stone would keep it at 90 degrees instead of going broadside to the wind, in which case it would capsize. So these drogue stones are all the way up the hill, and you get down to the bottom of the hill, and there is this monstrous fossil, and it's boat-shaped. It's exactly the length that they talk about Noah's Ark being. It has relics in it. They did sound surveys and sonar surveys. They found structures underneath it, and it's all there. And it's all, wow. It's not wood anymore. In fact, there was very little of it that was wood. It was mostly reed, made of reeds, not wood. But there it is.
It's funny, just as you were saying that, I looked on DuckDuckGo, and the article that came up from last year on ancientorigins.net, evidence that Noah's Ark landed on a mountain 17 miles south of Ararat. And it's got these pictures, and that's just mind-blowing to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's my conclusion. I think that's the real thing. I know this. If that wasn't Noah's Ark, it was somebody's ark. And it's up to somebody else. Until we dig up a brass plaque that says built by Noah and Sons, we don't know that it's Noah's Ark. But it was somebody's ark.
Wow. Well, this has been absolutely fantastic. I hesitate to call you Ed. I want to call you Mr. Griffin, just out of a respect for the body of work that you've created. You've got a website called redpilluniversity.org. You've got freedomforceinternational.org. Is there somewhere that you would like to direct people, for a quick introduction to, who you are and what you do beyond this interview?
Well, yes, but even on top of that, I would like to take advantage of the moment and what's happening on the calendar and ask people to come to redpillexpo.org, redpillexpo.org, because we've just decided that our next expo will be held on Jekyll Island.
Oh,
yes.
How perfect.
And so
nice.
We've been talking about that. So if anybody's interested in this topic, there'll be many other topics. The expo is not single topic at all, but it's 2 days of red pills on things like we're talking about. And so you'll get the information there at redpillexpo.org.
June 5th and 6th, 2020, yes. Jekyll Island, Georgia. What a great place to hold an event, kind of bring full circle, huh?
Yeah.
That is good.
Returning to the scene of the crime.
Yeah, that's great. I was actually chatting with Chris Snook today, and he wanted me to ask you one quick question. He has this project called Wealth Matters, and he was really curious about these negative rate policy that's happening by these central banks and the imminent path to zero interest rate and even maybe negative interest rate. And they said that yesterday they held that off until 2020. So now we're at 2%. They're not raising the interest rate currently, but they think that they're going to drop it eventually into these negative rates. Like, what's the key? I just ask this before we go. What's the key indicator for you that, the dominoes are falling now, and this fiat currency system is going to go away. The crisis is here. What's that tipping point, and does negative interest rates have anything to do with that?
Well, negative interest rates do have a lot to do with that, but I don't think they're ready for negative interest rates until they have cryptocurrencies, because that's just think about it. A negative interest rate means that they're taking money out of your account. You put money into the account. Instead of paying you interest, they take money out of your account, and they call that negative interest rate instead of theft. They should have just called it theft, but then they call it negative interest rate. So if they start doing that, people are going to take their money out of the banks, aren't they? But what if they can't take their money out of the banks because there is no money to take out of the banks? What if it's all digital? Now you can't take it out. Now they can do negative interest rates, and you can't do anything about it. So I don't expect negative interest rates to happen until cryptos are firmly at play in the banking system. And that's just an opinion. Now, who knows what they'll try to do? As long as people can take their money out of the banking system, it's going to be hard to enforce negative interest rates. Now, what's the key to what's happening? I'm not very good at this because I've always thought the thing was going to blow up. First, when I started learning about it, really back in the 70s, I thought, oh, this isn't going to last very long. And it's amazing. It just keeps going. But
it's hurt me with investments over the years too. Like I didn't trust the stock boom in the stock market because this is all fake money now. Like it's going to pop at any time. Yeah.
And I think you're right, at any time, but we just don't know what time. But I will say this, if you look around the world, what do you find? All of the central banks at the same time now are massively inflating the money supply all together. And it's like, how can this be? What do they think is going to happen out of this? And I have a feeling that they think that the game is coming to an end and they're going to plunder it as much as they can in the last few months before it pops. That's what I suspect. But as I said earlier, I've thought this before, so don't go rushing around and acting on that. But that's my honest suspicion. I won't say opinion, but it's my suspicion that it's getting very, very close right now.
Maybe the sky is falling. Maybe it's not. I don't
Maybe
know,
it's
but
not.
it's interesting to prognosticate. G. Edward Griffin, thank you so much again today for sharing with us. I have a feeling we could go on for hours because you just know so much, but we would encourage you guys to go to the show notes for today's episode. Check out all the links there. Grab a copy of The Creature from Jekyll Island. And if you want to be truly red-pilled, check out the upcoming conference, June of next year, the redpillexpo.org on Jekyll Island. Thanks again, Ed. Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys, and good luck on all your endeavors, and keep telling the truth.
Well, there you guys go. That is a lot to digest. We really encourage you to go to the show notes. There's a lot of links here that you're going to want to check out. Of course, there's G. Edward Griffin's Red Pill University. There's this Wikipedia page. There's Freedom Force International. There's the Red Pill Expo that's coming up next June. There's information about Jekyll Island, the interview with Yuri Bezmenov that Travis referred to, and the discussion we had about Noah's Ark is in there as well. Go to the show notes at badco.in/351. And, if you've been looking for an opportunity to share bad crypto with somebody, wow, this episode is the one, gang. In fact, let's go ahead and mobilize. This is a great New Year's present for everybody to start 2020, to have a friend, a family member, a business associate understand how money works in these United States of America, and by virtue of that, all over the world, right? Because the Fed impacts the entire world, actually, in the global economies. So just share this link with them, or get their phone from them and say, let me see your phone. Hey, Travis, can I see your phone a second?
No.
Give me your phone. Look, there's Godzilla. And then grab his phone while he's not looking. Okay. And just open up the podcast player, search Bad Crypto, subscribe them. Boom. That's it. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. And now they're listening to all the G. Edward Griffin goodness.
Yeah. Or just say, hey, listen to this interview with G. Edward Griffin by these guys at Bad Crypto. And then when you're done, subscribe. You don't have to take their phone and do that, but it's pretty funny to do. It's pretty fun to do. Do it, Mr. Joel Com says. Do it. And then go check out our other sponsor, MobiPay. Mr. Travis Wright, what are they all about? MobiPay is all about making crypto and regular transactions easy, right? So money has existed throughout the years, right? You've had these shells way back in the day and precious metals. Well, now payments are going mobile, and that's why MobiPay ecosystem has these 3 core applications that's going to allow people to send money and digital cryptos all over the world, all across their mobile phone. It has a really cool and easy to use mobile wallet, which I love. I mean, literally, you can send Mobi to just somebody's phone number, which is pretty handy, and it goes into their wallet that's attached. You're going to want to check it out. It's mobipay.io. They got some big things that's going to be announced in the new year. You guys are going to want to hear about it. It's good stuff. Go check it out. MobiPay, MOBIE, pay.io. Yes, sir. Mr. Travis Wright, guess what? This is our last episode for 2019. I would say that we popped off 2019 with a bang with G. Edward, huh?
And of course, episodes for 2020 are right around the corner. Since it's New Year's week, we've only got 2 episodes for you coming next week. We're taking a break here over New Year's Eve and New Year's Day, but we'll be back with another show on the 2nd of January in the
I have
year
some bad
of
news. I have some bad news that there's no bad news this week.
There's no bad news. It's going to be a great interview is coming up with Andy Bromberg and Christina Lamazzo. You're like, who are they? Oh, you're going to find out, and trust us, it's going to be really, really good stuff. So we'll catch you guys.
Well, not only that, right after that, we have Ricardo Spagni, Fluffy Pony of Monero on the show. Yeah. And then later on, we got John Kim of the Litecoin Foundation. We got Elise Sam coming on. We have some other really amazing stuff as well. You're going to want to tune in. We got and we got a great interview with Ben Swan that we're going to be talking about as well later down the road. So we got some great content lined up for you folks. 2020 is going to be amazing.
It is. And we're going to provide you with the best information and entertainment, infotainment, cryptotainment, if you will, to help you to make 2020 the year that you are the bestest at staying back.
Who's bad?
The Bad Crypto Podcast is a production of Bad Crypto LLC. The content of the show, the videos, and the website is provided for educational, informational, and entertainment purposes only. It's not intended to be and does not constitute financial, investment, or trading advice of any kind. You shouldn't make any decisions as to finances, investing, trading, or anything else based on this information without undertaking independent due diligence and consultation with a professional financial advisor. Please understand that the trading of Bitcoins and alternative cryptocurrencies have potential risks involved. Anyone wishing to invest in any of the currencies or tokens mentioned on this podcast should first seek their own independent professional financial advisor.